The training material that you are about to see is intended as a general overview of the subject being presented. This training is not being offered as an in-depth course and may not address all aspects of the subject matter being discussed. Always follow your plant's policies and procedures, which may differ from the video.
MTS training videos frequently feature exercise questions designed to test the knowledge and awareness of the employees viewing the training. When the question mark symbol appears in the corner of the screen, you may choose to press pause on your video player and discuss the exercise question.
No one wants to be injured at work, and it goes without saying that all incidents are unintentional. Unfortunately, serious incidents continue to occur with some regularity in our industry, and many are still of the belief that these incidents just happen. Incidents don't just happen. They are preventable when hazards are recognized and properly addressed. Effective hazard recognition can be the difference between a near-miss event and a very serious injury or a fatality. Before we begin discussing hazard recognition techniques, let's first define a hazard. A hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm to people, damage to property or the environment, or loss to processes. Governmental agencies define a hazard as the potential for harm that is associated with a condition or activity that, if left uncontrolled, can result in an injury or illness. In industry and in life, hazards are all around us. Unfortunately, we cannot eliminate all hazards, so we must be prepared to stop, identify the hazards, and control them to the best of our abilities. This is known as hazard recognition, and those who perform effective hazard recognition will experience far less incidents and injuries at work and at home. Hazard recognition is a very structured and organized way of identifying all hazards prior to performing any task, no matter how complex. In this training, we will outline different hazard recognition methods that you can use to keep you and your coworkers safe while on the job. But first, let's take a look at how hazards are created. Over the years, companies have worked to identify the vast majority of hazards that were related to the processes employed in their plants. Companies are still working to institute engineering changes and put controls in place to eliminate or greatly diminish hazards. As technology changes, so does the ability to eliminate some hazards that may have been considered acceptable in the past. In addition, some of the hazards encountered in our industry are created by employees during the course of their work. Let's take a look at this scenario. As you can see, this employee placed the cutting hose across the walkway, creating a tripping hazard. He could have parked the cylinder cart on the same side of the walkway as the object that he was cutting, and it would have kept a potential tripping hazard off of the walkway. Now, let's look at another scenario. It's obvious that this was not a good place to park a forklift. The physical location where the forklift was parked created the hazard. By simply parking the forklift in an out-of-the-way location, the hazard is eliminated. Can you identify the hazard being created in this activity? By leaning this large machine guard against the wall, this worker is exposing himself to a potential pinch point or struck-by hazard if the guard falls. Here you can see how work activities can quickly create a hazard. This employee is exposing himself to potential electrical shock by using a grinder and allowing the sparks to fall on the electrical cord. Recognizing this potential and taking the necessary steps to protect the electrical cord from sparks will mitigate this hazard. All of these scenarios share several characteristics. First, each of them occurred in a matter of seconds. This illustrates how quickly hazards can appear in areas that were previously safe. Secondly, each hazard was created unintentionally. Finally, each hazard had the potential to cause a serious injury. This is why it is important to examine each task that you perform and ask yourself if you could possibly be creating a hazard. Now, can you identify the hazard? This is a hazard because the gas can was not returned to the flammable storage cabinet. It is important to recognize the hazards that can occur when items are not stored in their proper location. There are many hazard recognition methods that can be used in the workplace to help you identify and ultimately prevent hazards such as the ones we just reviewed. Some methods are as simple as examining your path of travel for slip, trip, and fall hazards, while others are more complex, like conducting a risk assessment. Remember, a hazard may not be identified by one particular method, but may be easily detected by another. For this reason, the more hazard recognition methods you know and use, the more likely you will be able to identify hazards and the potential for incidents and injury on the job. Some of the most common hazard recognition methods used in our industry include pre-use inspections, risk assessments, pre-task planning, work permits, and equipment inspections. Pre-use inspections are commonly used to inspect PPE, fall protection equipment, and rigging equipment, such as chains and slings, before each use. Pre-use inspections provide you with the opportunity to identify hazards and correct them before beginning any task. For example, last year at a recycling facility, a worker was conducting a pre-use inspection on a pair of cut-resistant gloves prior to working on the picking line. While performing the inspection, the worker noticed that a small hole had worn through on the palm of one of the gloves and discarded the gloves for new ones. By performing this pre-use inspection, this worker was able to avoid a laceration hazard and potential for a serious hand injury. A risk assessment is a step-by-step process that is performed for all routine tasks and entails identifying potential hazards in each step of the task and how each hazard will be avoided. Once a risk assessment is completed, the information is used to write a step-by-step procedure on how to perform each routine task safely. Examples of this hazard recognition method include Safe Job Procedures, SJPs, Job Safety Analysis, JSAs, and Energy Control Procedures, ECPs. The following is an example of how one recycling facility used a risk assessment to identify potential hazards. A new baler was installed at the facility. Since workers responsible for operating the new baler were not familiar with the new hazards they would encounter, a team was formed to outline each step required to operate the baler. Potential hazards in each step were identified, and a safe operating procedure was developed to mitigate each of the hazards. A pre-task plan is used to assist line management and assign task leaders or coordinators with reviewing critical aspects of non-routine tasks, complex tasks, or tasks with unusual or significant safety risks. It serves to be a reminder of key safety hazards that must be addressed prior to the start of any non-routine or complex task. This hazard recognition method is commonly used in the recycling industry when equipment breakdowns occur. Recently, a breakdown occurred on a downstream conveyor at an eastern facility. Responding to equipment breakdowns, such as this, can be non-routine and very hazardous. To protect the workers from the hazards associated with the downstream conveyor breakdown, this facility used a pre-task checklist to identify the hazards and plan the safest possible response. Work permits are checklists that assure all proper precautions are taken before beginning any high-hazard task. The most common examples of this hazard recognition method are confined space permits, hot work permits, and excavation permits. An incident occurred last year in a recycling facility. Workers were preparing to enter a confined space, and while completing a confined space entry permit, an oxygen-deficient atmosphere was identified. This potentially fatal condition was identified and corrected prior to entry into the confined space due to use of work permits as a hazard recognition method. Equipment inspections are used to identify potential hazards that may exist on the various forms of industrial equipment. Equipment inspections are required for all mobile equipment and cranes used on the job. Equipment inspections are commonly used to identify hazards in the recycling industry. Recently, while conducting an equipment inspection, a material handler operator identified a brake problem on one of the material handlers prior to beginning his shift. The material handler was immediately taken out of service until the brakes could be repaired, thereby eliminating any potential for a serious incident. Hazard recognition is everyone's responsibility. However, recognizing hazards are only part of ensuring a safe work environment. If you are successful at using hazard recognition methods, you can avoid incidents and injuries and return home safely every day.